Hello and welcome to 5 Year Club video number 176. Da-da-da. Working in tech, working in the technology industry. Since I work in the technology industry, have for I guess about 11 years now, I've got a lot of thoughts about it, and it seems like a popular thing on YouTube to talk about a day in the life of a Silicon Valley engineer or whatever. But that's not really what my channel's about. My channel was about personal finance. And so it didn't really seem appropriate to me to say a day in the life of the engineer or something like that, or talk about any of the technical coding issues or anything like that, because it's just a different subject, and maybe I want a different channel and do it there, but not for this one. That doesn't mean, though, that I think there's kind of nothing that I can say about the tech industry to help somebody financially. I think there's a lot I can say about it, actually. And so I just wrote up some words tonight to give someone outside the tech industry a way of framing it, a way of thinking about it. And because, tech and medicine, those are the top two ways to make money, I think, in the next 20 or 30 years. Finance too, but increasingly finance is becoming tech or getting mixed in with tech. Personal finance income helps a lot. And so here we go. All right. What is the tech industry? Let's look at the shape of it. There is a lot of inefficiency in the world, and this inefficiency hurts us and prevents us from doing things as quickly as we could, doing things with as little resources as we could. And if we would just spend more time thinking about these things, then we could get a lot of benefit. I mean, just off the top of my head, like alcohol abuse. There are like a huge number of people die from alcohol abuse every year. A huge number of people suffer from alcohol abuse. They lose their jobs. They lose their marriages. Their emotional growth is stunted because instead of working through their issues, they just knock one back. And if we would just think about these issues more, right, then we could solve them. So in the case of alcohol abuse, if somebody who was abusing alcohol can just learn that they are abusing alcohol and learn the alternatives to abusing alcohol and learn how to learn all this stuff and change the way that they're operating in their life, then there are giant advantages to that. But there's a problem, and the problem is that this thinking has to be done by the meat computer inside of our heads, and the meat computer inside our heads has developed over millions of years to be concerned with other things. It's concerned with like eating, mating, sleeping, and yep, that's it. No, I mean, I don't know, taking care of kids. Like the meat computer likes what it likes. And there are certainly things that would be very helpful for it to do, either for itself or for other people. But it doesn't enjoy doing those things as much as its primary functions. And the result is that we just don't do some of these more tedious things that would be very profitable. We don't remind our friend over and over and over again of something they should be doing, or we don't sort a catalog of 10,000 things by price so that we can marginally sell 10% more, which even if that's worth $100,000 a year to a company to pay you to do that, you don't want to sort things all day. That's really boring. And this is fundamentally, I think, why computers have become so popular, and fundamentally why computers have become so successful in improving our lives, because what the computers do is they essentially take these tasks that we can think about, we just don't want to, and they're willing to do these things. Well, they don't really have a will, but they can do these thinking tasks, narrowly defined, billions of times faster. They can do it 24 hours a day with no sleep, and they don't suffer from the same cognitive biases that we have and the same heuristics that sometimes fail, the approximations that we make in our heads to make quick decisions. And, this is why Uber is way better at providing you with transportation than the old cab companies where you'd have to call somebody and then get put on hold and then eventually maybe get a cab in 15 minutes for 3 times the price of an Uber. So there's huge benefits to technology, and we have realized this especially in the past 50 years, computers in particular. And as a result, people on Earth pay a lot of money for computer-related services. If you think about money as favors from other people, computers have provided so much benefit to people around the world that they are willing to do favors for people who will work on or around computers to continue these advancements. And as a result of these favors, people at tech companies, and especially big tech companies, but also small tech companies, are treated really, really well. I mean, you go to some of these big tech companies and they have a gym nicer than your high school, maybe your college gym. They have food that is definitely better than even college food at like a super expensive private university. Your team can go on ski trips and just fancy things that I never even thought of when I was in high school. And it's an easy life. It's a really easy life compared with certainly with what people suffer through in countries outside of America. India, Mexico, Vietnam, China. I mean, a lot of different places. I don't want to there's a lot of countries. So the fact that I picked those were just because those were the first X many countries that came to mind, not because I think they're the best examples. So let's not get stuck on the country thing. All right. So that is, broadly speaking, what the tech industry is, right? And why it's a good place to be. Now, the next thing I'm going to cover is engineering in the tech industry, and I'm going to do it because I want to get it out of the way because it's what I work in, but it's not what I want to get stuck on for this video. In engineering, you're given a problem, and the problem can be something like, how do you play a video on a website that people can go to? And once somebody gives you that problem, then you have to figure out how to solve that problem. And so you got to go read a bunch of stuff that other people have written about how to solve that problem, and then you have to execute all the different steps necessary to make a video play on a website. And this can be a tremendous number of steps. This could be 500 steps. Now, the good news is that almost everything you need to do as an engineer, it's not every single engineer, because there are people doing new stuff, but for most engineers in Silicon Valley, almost everything you need to do has already been done by someone else and described in minute detail. So all you need to do is go out and find that description and read it to know how to do that thing. That's the good news. The bad news is that there is a ton of detail about how to do these things, and so it's going to take you time to study and understand all of this detail. And many times you're going to read a description of the details and you're not going to understand it. And you're going to have to come back the next day and read it again and talk to somebody else and find a second description. But you will get there. It's just you get used to the first time you read something, you don't understand what's going on. Over time, you're going to memorize the core skills, whatever they are in your job. And you're not going to have to actively think about the details of those core skills. So your brain's probably going to be on autopilot 50% of the time as you're doing the work. But problems will still come up and you'll still have to go and do more reading and figure out more things. People will bring you new problems that involve connecting with new partners, and you're going to have to go read the specifications of that new partner. However, just overall in the shape of the profession, the hardest part for an engineer is in the beginning of the profession, in my opinion, because in the very beginning, you don't actually know how to learn yet, and you don't have a good gauge of how hard everything is yet, or how easy everything is yet, and so everything seems worrisome. But as you accomplish more and more things in the profession, you get a better idea of how hard things are going to be, even if you haven't done them before. And you also get a good idea of like, well, this looks hard, but I know that it'll be solved in 2 weeks no matter what, so I'm not afraid of it, and that makes the whole thing easier. Engineering as a career path, it's a solid career path. Why? Because engineers, at least in Silicon Valley, they make good money. They generally make $100,000 or more. They aren't the first people that are laid off typically, because they're maintaining systems and because they're flexible and can build new systems. So if your business is struggling and it needs to pivot, you may lay off, the salespeople that weren't producing, but if you lay off the engineers, you're not actually going to have the people you need to pivot to the new business idea. This doesn't mean that engineers never get laid off. They certainly do. Sometimes an engineer is very specialized and the company pivots to just a different topic that doesn't need that specialized skill. But generally speaking, it's one of the more stable professions in an industry where I think it's something like 35,000 new companies start every year. Many of them fail before the 5-year mark, so there's a lot of churn. So those are good parts about engineering, that it's high pay and it's relatively stable. And I would say for me, the top 2 downsides of engineering are these. Number 1 is that as an engineer, you spend a lot of time with problems and not people. And so if you love talking to people, then the profession can seem isolating. That doesn't mean that you don't talk to anybody as an engineer, but the bottom line is that at the end of the day, the work needs to get done. And if you're talking about a software engineer, the code needs to be written. And there will be many details about how that code needs to be written. And if you talked about all those details, the work would go too slowly. Someone has to work through those details. That person, if you're an engineer, will be you. And talking to other people will not write the code. You have to actually sit down and write the code. And sitting at a computer and doing that will take time. That time displaces the time that you would be talking to other people. And so, you don't talk as much often. And so for me, I think that has been, that's a downside of the career. I think by talking. And so I'm the crazy guy sitting at his computer talking to nobody in particular, because that's how I work through the problem. And so yeah, there are certain people where you need to be communicating and talking and connecting with people. And in that case, engineering, it may mean that you can get an engineering degree and then work as like a sales engineer or some part of engineering where you constantly interface with other people, but you probably will not end up being a super technical specialized architect engineer. And the second downside, I think that I have found, is that in engineering, people will put you in a box. And the people who you work with who are not engineers will tend to kind of box you in, and I'm trying to find the best way of saying it, but they'll kind of communicate with you as if you're an engineer and what you know how to do is engineering and you don't know how to do much else. And I think that the reason why this happens is that if they didn't kind of orient themselves that way, and they believed that you could both build the product and design the product and make the product look good, then, well, these are the jobs of people who are generally talking to you. And so they would feel like they didn't have much to contribute. And, nobody wants to think that way. Everybody wants to think that their job is valuable. And so I think that the way that people outside of engineering, one way that they fortify their value is by kind of boxing in engineers. And if you go into the profession as somebody who doesn't consider themselves an engineer, then this is going to be frustrating. As you move on in engineering and you have different roles, your experiences are going to kind of mark you to recruiters as a specialist in certain areas, and then the recruiter is going to approach you in a very narrow way. And the recruiter might say, like, I see that you're an excellent iOS engineer. I have these iOS engineering positions. And you're thinking, like, well, I worked on iOS for a little bit, but not particularly good at iOS versus anything else. But that's how you're going to be approached. And so this gets annoying, frankly, because as the person who actually builds the stuff as an engineer, a lot of times you're going to be able to see something that you could change very quickly that would be beneficial. But because people see you as the person who implements a specification and they've boxed you in there instead of somebody who writes the specification, then you're not going to be able to actually make that change. Instead, you can suggest that change, and it may be 2 months or never before somebody comes back to you with permission to actually make the change. And that can be frustrating. And there's no company I've been at where this doesn't happen. It happens at every single company. There's some ego with it, in terms of, like, you have a product that people can understand, and executives like to feel important. And so executives want to shape that product with their vision. And so if they have decided something in a meeting, a week ago, and then you as an engineer tweak it and change it, their ego is going to be hurt when they see that change. And so that's why these processes are created, so that things cannot change outside of these meetings. And there are legitimate reasons too. Like, there are agreements with partners where the partner wants very specific things and a contract depends on it. So it's not like totally black and white. But at the end of the day, point is, this kind of pigeonholing happens everywhere as an engineer. Depends on the size of the company, depends on the people that you're working with. I haven't been anywhere where it hasn't happened, but it's a thing. So that's something that you'll have to deal with. And, for sure, engineering is not the only part of a company where the pigeonholing happens. If you're in marketing, I would assume that people think that you can't write code, whether or not that's true. So I don't know. I'm not in marketing. Someone else will have to speak to that. And finally, the real valuable section, at least for me, that I want to talk about tonight is not engineering, the parts of the tech industry that are not engineering. Let's back up a bit. As I said before, computers are successful because they do the thinking that people do not want to do. In fact, there's actually a book called Don't Make Me Think. It's about web design. The key question then, if computers are really good at doing this thinking, is what thinking do people want computers to do for them? That's the valuable stuff. What problems do people want computers to solve for them by doing this thinking? The universe of everything a computer can possibly do is infinite. It's huge. And relative to everything the computer could do, the number of really valuable things that you could do is small, and that number of things, it changes over time, right? Like, after you have Uber and Lyft, it's not as valuable to create Uber and Lyft again, right? Or after we learn how to teleport, we don't need Uber and Lyft anymore. So this stuff changes. Engineers know how to build a huge range of things. Certainly nothing near the huge range of things that could be built, but a large number of things. However, often engineers will be so busy working out the implementation details of how to build something that they simply don't have the time to do the research to figure out the most valuable thing for the business that could possibly be built, the most valuable thing for the business's customers that could possibly be built. Figuring that out requires getting out of the computer. You have to go out into the real world and talk to people and understand them and understand what they're willing to give their money, their favors for, and understand if that is marketable. In other words, you may come up with a fantastic solution to somebody's problem, but if you can't communicate to them what you've done because it's too complicated, then they're never going to have their problem solved because they'll never buy your product because they'll just get confused. The people who decide what should be built, broadly speaking, it's called product management. And then, of course, after you decide what should be built, you need to spread the good news and communicate this to people who have never heard of you before. Tell them about it. Educate them about it. That's called marketing. And, hopefully you're going to build a product that works, solve somebody's problem, and you start telling people about it. They get excited. But now you have more demand and you need to scale up your team. So you need to go raise more money. That's called fundraising. So you have people who are going to sell your business as an investment to investors. And of course, now you've got engineers and marketing people and product managers and fundraising people, and you need to coordinate things over time so that they line up, so that nothing gets missed. And you have a project manager. And the project manager is my cat's attacking the wrong food bowl. The project manager is the person who's going to coordinate all these other people and try to reduce some of the inefficiency associated with tons of different things going on at once. So there are a lot of roles in this industry that are not sitting in a computer writing code. And while all of those roles require some kind of understanding of technology, it's nothing near the same as engineering and can be understood by normal people. So my point with this is that there is an ecosystem of people, and ostensibly they're all in tech, but they're all doing very different things. There are very different types of people who are attracted to these roles and who succeed in these roles. Everybody is getting paid pretty well because everybody needs to be there to make the ship go forward. And on top of that, all of the products that we're working on are very different. Some of the products are physical items like iPhones. Others are virtual services like Facebook or a social network. Some of the products are easy to communicate and understand, such as Uber. Others are harder to understand, such as field programmable gate arrays. All right. Who cares? What's the end of this? The end is that there are a ton of different opportunities to use computers to improve people's lives. And you'll hear people say, I work in tech, but it doesn't really mean anything. It's just a convenient thing to say as a shortcut to say that, like, I work in a growing industry that affords me a pretty good life. We pretend that we can talk about it that way after we hear people say enough times, I work in tech. As if you can say it's good to work in tech or it's bad to work in tech. But there are so many different details about how you can work in tech. There are so many different situations, company sizes, products, positions, time periods within the history of technology development, that it's much more like an ice cream shop or something where you walk into the shop because ice cream is delicious, but you're not sure what flavor you want, but there's like 400 flavors. And so generally speaking, there's something for everyone. Generally speaking, I don't immediately in my head know anyone where they would never be able to find anything in the technology industry that would be a very satisfying career for them. Now, that's not going to mean that you find the best job first. That's not going to mean that you find the most delicious ice cream first when you choose from among those 400 flavors, those 400 different combinations of job and company and product. But there are so many available opportunities that if you aren't happy with your first job, in a year you can try something else. You can try a different flavor. And people do this all the time. I think the average tenure is something like 2 years at a company. They do it all the time. And so it's not a problem if you don't like something about one of the jobs. As I said before, there are 35,000 startups coming online. I forgot if they exist all at once or if they're like starting per year. There are thousands starting every year. And so there's just a tremendous amount of possibilities. And you're treated really well, and it's a great career path. And that is why, at the end of the day, I encourage people get into tech. If somebody says, I don't know what to do with my life, I say, look at tech or medicine, because the variety is huge and the pay is great. And generally speaking, I've worked with people who are very smart, very friendly, easy to get along with. Even if they aren't social butterflies, they're still nice people. So, all right, that is it for 5-Year Club video number 176. I hope this was helpful. And if you have any questions, any specific questions, I'm happy to say whatever I know about it. I've worked in Silicon Valley for 11 years at 5 different companies, and so that's what I got. All right, have a fabulous evening.